$5 billion. Denied. $5 billion. Denied. $5 billion. Denied. That's how much the IRS has denied in employee retention credit refunds. And they're just getting started. They're just getting started. So if you have clients who have filed their ERC claims, even legitimate ones, you might be sitting in a sinking ship. Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Taxes Tuesday. I am Nafisa Munir, your tax attorney CEO, who rescues businesses and individuals with tax debt and trains the next generation of tax attorneys, CPAs, and EAs to do the same. Welcome. I hope you have been having a fantastic day. Yes, I do. And we're going to dive right into it and get right into today's topic about the IRS ERC claim crackdown. And we want to know, why are they denying more than $5 billion in ERC claims? What does this mean for your clients? And what can you do as a tax representation specialist to get prepared for when the IRS comes knocking on your door? Now, to make sure that you are prepared, there's 4 areas that we want to look at today. All right, 4 areas we want to look at. Make sure that you are prepared when the IRS comes knocking about your client's ERC issues. The first is you want to know, why is this crackdown happening? Why are they cracking down on ERC? Second, we want to look at the numbers, because even though I'm an attorney and we like to look at the law, I'm also a CPA. So we got to look at the numbers and see what the numbers, what the story they're telling us with the numbers. Third is we want to look at, what does all this fallout mean for tax professionals like you and I? And then the last thing we want to look at, what is it that you must know to make sure that you are prepared for when your client has ERC issues. Let's jump right in and get started. The first thing we want to look at is, why is the IRS cracking down on ERC in the first place? And if we remember, this whole employee retention credit came about during COVID, right? During the shutdown, as a way for employers trying to be an incentive for them to basically keep employees on the payroll. Right? This is how the ERC came to be in the first place. But because of that, and there was so much money flowing, trying to get the economy growing, right? So that it wouldn't collapse, what you had a lot of third-party representatives who were basically promoting this whole ERC. They were promoting it, doing all this marketing campaign to promote it out there. They were aggressively marketing ERC for everybody, for all kind of businesses. And so you had a lot of businesses that are qualifying. You had a lot of fraud going on, and this resulted in a tidal wave of questionable claims being filed with the IRS. So much so that in September of 2023, the IRS just froze all the processing of ERCs. And I know I had several clients that had ERCs filed, and it was just frozen. All the processing was just frozen. So this is what happened, and why the IRS instituted a crackdown on the ERC. Second, we want to let's look at the numbers. When we talk about the numbers, what kind of story do the numbers tell us? Okay, well, there were more than 28,000 claims that were disallowed. That's number one. And this resulted in more than $5 billion of refunds being denied, right? Being denied. And 460 criminal investigations of the promoters who were promoting this ERC, right? And committing fraud, as well as taxpayers. Right? This is what is happening. And as a result of those 28,000 who were denied, the IRS basically used analytics to deny them quickly. And they got a lot of pushback from practitioners in our field because they denied claims that were actually legitimate claims. Okay, so much so that in October of 2024, the IRS still had 1.2 million ERC claims which have not even been filed. Now, in recent months, they have gotten caught up. I won't say caught up, but they have allowed more of these claims, and they have processed more of these claims through the latter part of 2024 and the beginning of 2025. Okay, so what does all this fallout mean for you as a tax attorney, as a CPA, as an EA who specializes in tax representation work? What does all of this fallout mean for you? Well, number one, we have to look at even our honest businesses can get caught up in the IRS's ERC net. And this is because the IRS also announced that it will be reversing and recapturing some of the refunds that is already issued. So what does that mean for your client? If your client has already received their ERC refund, they can still be subjected to the IRS recapturing that back or reversing that back and wanting their refund back. Okay, and they're going to issue letters. I think the specific letter is called is the letter 6577C, which is the employee retention credit recapture. Okay, so if your client receives that, that means, yeah, that refund that they received ERC, the IRS wants it back. Okay, so we're going to have to defend our clients when it comes to that particular, when it comes to those particular claims. And there may be legal grounds, right, which is a deeper conversation. There may be legal grounds to fight and defend the recapture of those ERC refunds, but that's for another day. Okay, the other thing that we want to look at is, with the recent passage of the one big beautiful bill, the one big beautiful tax bill that passed, well, part of that in that bill that related to ERCs was, number one, they were not going to be accepting any more ERC applications after January of 2025 relating to the 2021 year. They were not going to be accepting anymore. Okay, so that's one thing that came out of that bill. The other thing that came out of that bill was that the statute of limitations for ERC claims have been extended for 6 years. So the IRS can come after you, can come after your client for up to 6 years for any type of ERC that they have filed. So that's came out of the recent bill that was just passed this July. So you want to make sure that you keep those things in mind when dealing with that. And let me just make sure that I have made you aware of that before we go into the last section, which is what is it that you must do to make sure that you are prepared to defend these employee retention credit recapture, if that's the case, or just defend your client if they haven't received their refund. So the first thing that you want to be able to do for your client is we want to be proactive. So you want to be able to go ahead and re-review that the ERC claim that your client filed to make sure that you have a strong case. You have a strong case for your client for your client's eligibility of the ERC, right? And that you have all the documentation. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have documentation, then how can you prove your eligibility for the credit? So that's one thing, is to be proactive about that. And you can go to, even if you were not involved, hopefully you were not involved in the preparation of the ERC actual application and claim filing, but you can go to the IRS site. They have a employee retention tax credit eligibility checklist. And I would say, go ahead and you go through that checklist, because I know I went through that checklist for my client. I have several different clients that have ERC issues, right? And since I didn't prepare it, right, I went and looked at, just as a preliminary, looked at that ERC checklist on the IRS website to just go through that from a proactive standpoint. The second thing is, you want to warn your clients about these possible delays, possible denials, and audits that could be taking place. And if your client has filed an ERC application but have not received anything about it, sometimes they just got to be patient, because you have had some of these applications that have been sitting, some of these claims have been sitting outstanding for 2 years. Okay, so I would say just be patient as the IRS works through the processing of that, particularly if you feel your client has a strong ERC claim. Now, if after reviewing this, you think your client might have a weak one, the IRS has provided 2 mechanisms. One is, if your client has already filed, the opportunity for them to withdraw their application before it is processed and paid, right? Because you don't want your client being subjected to additional penalties, and of course them having to pay you more fees, right? More money going down the drain when they don't have the documentation to support their ERC claim. Right? You gotta have the documentation. It's not saying that they were trying to commit fraud, but maybe, a lot of things happen. And at the end of the day, if you don't have the documentation, you might want to counsel your client to withdraw their ERC claim. And the IRS has provided a process for that to take place. Okay. In addition to what they call voluntary disclosure programs. And basically, this is just saying, if you feel that your client was issued a refund, but maybe their documentation is weak, maybe they shouldn't have really have been issued a refund when you look at it. The IRS has put together a disclosure program for them basically to be able to repay without being subjected to any, further investigation. Okay. Now, if you feel that your client has a strong case and strong documentation, then of course I would not go through this. You wouldn't go through this route. Okay. Another thing that you want to make sure that you are doing to make sure that you are prepared is, number one, keeping abreast on the latest updates of the ERC and what's going on in terms of them processing all those applications, all those refunds, right? And then making sure that you position yourself to defend your client in these ERC cases. Okay, so I hope that was a benefit to you. Of course, we talked about why the IRS is cracking down on ERCs. Then we looked at the numbers. What was going on with the numbers in terms of this $5 billion that have been denied? And then third, we looked at, what does all this fallout mean for those in the tax representation industry who want to advocate and defend their clients? And then fourth, we looked at, what is it that you need to do to make sure that you are prepared to defend and advocate for your client in the ERC area. Okay, so this employee retention credit was designed to help businesses, but today it's become the IRS's favorite target. And with $5 billion already denied, the question isn't whether the crackdown is real. The question is, are you prepared to defend your clients? I hope this was a benefit to you. Thank you for joining me today for another episode of Let's Talk Taxes Tuesday. I am Nafisa Manira. And if you have any questions about this, please make sure you contact me at taxroadmapusa.com. And I hope to see you next week on another episode of Let's Talk Taxes Tuesday. Bye.